Hello everyone, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our stories.
In the heart of the western slopes, nestled quietly away from the itineraries of the world, there is a small town painted with the brushstrokes of memory and held together by the soft sighs of passing seasons. Here autumn descends with the certainty of old promises kept, and the air is always laced with the scent of turning leaves and the expectation of homecoming. The road that winds its way toward town narrows as it ascends, like a ribbon pulled gently between two hands. Old maples flank the sides, their branches raised as if in greeting, their leaves catching the fleeting warmth of pale yellow sunlight. Each leaf that breaks away floats to earth in a slow, deliberate spiral, landing upon stones and dust alike, a farewell note written by the season itself. On this quiet afternoon, Lynn sits inside the final bus from the city, her thoughts drifting as steadily as the scenery beyond the fogged window. She presses her forehead to the chilled glass, feeling the thrum of the engine beneath her skin and listening to the muted world outside. The bridge spanning a narrow stream, the humble cafe trimmed in faded red lanterns, the tumble of wild grass where laughter used to rise. As each familiar landmark passes, Lynn recognizes them not as things merely seen, but as things felt, each retaining the imprint of times now folded away, each colored by the duskier palette of memory. When the bus pulls to its stop beneath the sighing branches, Lynn steps down into the hush of evening. The sky is stained the color of old paper, gray and expectant, and a wind heavy with the promise of rain tugs at her coat. She pulls her scarf closer, a thick brown woolen twist, its edges softened and threads pulled loose by long use and older affection. It is both boundary and anchor, a remnant of a story not quite finished. The way to her childhood home takes her through a narrow alley, bordered by tangled gardens and the steep-shouldered walls of houses left untouched by progress. Her own gate stands askew, groaning beneath her touch. As she steps through, she inhales the mingled scents of moss, aging wood, and the faintest trace of the flowers her mother once tended. The first thing that meets her eyes is the lusterless yellow of the walls, paint peeling back like old bark, windows drooping on uneven hinges. Beneath her feet, the leaves lay dense and uncollected, a thick, soft carpet in which faded yellows and brittle reds quietly return to earth. On the porch, her father sits with the composure of someone who has grown used to waiting. His radio buzzes quietly with a distant melody. His eyelids droop in the honeyed light of the descending sun. A few white strands of hair lift and dance in the breeze, and when he hears Lynn's footsteps, he wakes gently, as if from a very long and gentle dream. There are no hard questions in his gaze, only a warmth, as if every absence must end with return, every distance be closed with the simplest of words. He takes her hand with a grip that has lost its fervor but none of its love. In the quiet porch gloom, Lynn feels herself welcome, never judged, only witnessed. Inside, the house remembers everything. Shadows gather in the corners where laughter once hid. Dust lies over the furniture like an undisturbed shroud, and each familiar object is only a little more faded than she remembers. On the table by the window, her mother's orchid leans, having stubbornly outlasted its own beauty, its last yellowing leaf trembling in the dusk. The photo in the frame catches the fall light, her mother's face serene, lips held in a secret smile, eyes following something just beyond the camera. Lynn traces her mother's image, reverent and hesitant, trying to find comfort in a face she can only meet in memory. As darkness gathers and the quiet outside deepens, Lynn finds herself drawn to her old bedroom. The bed creaks under her, the woven mattress as familiar in its discomfort as the restless dreams that used to haunt her. From beneath the window, where moonlight slides in striped across the tiled floor, she listens. The house murmurs with the soft shuffle of settling wood, the gentle sigh of leaves brushed against the window pane, and the thin, hollow whistle of wind squeezing through the loose-fitting doorway. The night grows colder, but the scarf remains at her side, a tangible promise, a keepsake worn soft by distance and longing. She clutches it to her chest, closing her eyes against the world outside and the ache of things left unsaid. For a moment, Lynn is young again, the boundaries of past and present blurred by the comfort of return. The memory unspools. The sharp, clear chill of an autumn day, the taste of anticipation, the edge of a new beginning. She remembers, as if it is now, the way she waited beneath a maple tree that had not yet lost its leaves. The sunlight, clear and fierce, filtered through branches, dappling the white shirt of the boy who smiled at her with all the reckless certainty of youth. The smile lingered, crooked and shy, never quite meeting the questions in her eyes but answering them all the same. It is a memory that aches like sweet music, the kind that plays only when the rest of the world is silent. The kind that is woven into every thread of the scarf she holds close. In this house, surrounded by the fallen leaves of the season, Lynn feels time balancing delicately between what has been lost and what is still to come. The town outside, unchanged yet weathered by the passage of years, waits patiently for morning, for the slow, golden stirring of another autumn day. Lynn closes her eyes, and the world narrows to the warmth of her scarf. The gentle memory of her mother's smile, her father's quiet acceptance, and the lingering sun-struck echo of a boy's promise beneath the maples. As the night folds in around her and the wind outside gathers strength, Lynn rests in the gentle hush, knowing that every return is measured, not just in distance traveled, but in the small, persistent things we carry with us along the way. In the comfort of home and memory, she drifts toward sleep. The mingled scents of moss, old wood, and autumn leaves whispering that some things, though changed, are never truly lost. Perhaps memories are truly like autumn leaves, delicate in their attachment, yet astonishingly eager to drift away with the gentlest encouragement. In the quiet depths of that mist-laden night, Lynn found herself caught between waking and dreams, her restlessness amplified not by fear nor by uncertainty, but by the persistent ache of remembrance. Each flutter of the wind through the old tiles above her head called forth echoes of seasons past. The chorus of insects outside wove a gentle, endless lullaby, but sleep evaded her. Instead, her mind replayed the soft contours of his face, his eyes kind and quietly intent, hauntingly vivid against the darkness, as real as her own breath. His name, still so familiar on her lips, was Khan. That autumn, their world was bound within the perimeter of a schoolyard, guarded by elegant rows of maples whose branches reached skyward in gentle arcs. The leaves were in the midst of transformation, shifting from lively summer green to a vibrant array of reds and golds. On one ordinary morning, Lynn knelt in the gravel, fingers fumbling with stubborn shoelaces, when a single red leaf tumbled down, brushed her shoulder, and startled her gaze upwards. There stood Khan, a few steps away, poised in the dappled sunlight, his gentle eyes watching, one hand grasping a slightly worn math book. He smiled, a quiet, private smile touched with a hint of amusement, as if greeting an old companion rather than a near stranger. "You failed this one," he remarked with a mischievous glint, but extended a hand not with disappointment, but with an unexpected offering. A small wild daisy, dewy and unassuming. From that moment, a silent understanding grew between them. Days flowed into one another, sometimes passing with the familiar sounds and laughter of friends and groups. Other times, each paired for school duties, yet the moments she cherished most were the ones spent beneath the outstretched branches of the old maple, the two of them seated against its sturdy trunk, open books resting in their laps. Silence often lingered between them, not awkward but comfortably gentle. The mere presence of one another filled the air with reassurance, as if tranquility itself descended with every fluttering leaf. Khan's voice often lingered in Lynn's thoughts, a deep and slightly hoarse timbre made for telling stories. He read voraciously, scrawling fragmented passages and whimsical reflections into his weathered notebooks, dreaming of one day capturing the world's stories as a journalist. Lynn, meanwhile, preferred to listen, collecting pieces of conversation and holding on to them the way one treasures a favorite season. She had always loved autumn, though she could never quite say why. Perhaps it was that hint of melancholy, or the hush that enveloped the world as it prepared to slumber, or perhaps it was simply that autumn gave her space to feel. There, tucked away in her memory, lingered the softness of a late October afternoon. The sky clouded, the sunlight slanted and shy. They rode a creaking bicycle together past pale gold fields, the air thick with the freshly cut scent of straw. The horizon was achingly wide, limitless in every direction, yet fenced in by the comfort of their togetherness. At the crest of the hill, Khan stopped, rooting through his worn backpack with a curious nervousness. He handed her a brown paper box, its edges softened from being carried. "An early birthday present," he said with half a glance, his voice roughened by shyness. Inside she found a scarf, dark, earthy brown, clearly handmade. The knitting was far from perfect. Some stitches bunched together, others stood loose and uneven. Yet as she ran her fingers across the rough yarn, she felt an unmistakable heat, as if his care had warmed each imperfect thread. "You learned to knit?" Her voice was more a whisper, surprised and undeniably touched. Well, Khan laughed quietly, but trying to do it myself seemed more sincere. Lynn only nodded, the weight of words escaping her. Bowing her head, she wound the scarf around her neck, her heart fluttering wildly, her smile hidden from him but not from the world. After that, autumn seemed to stretch longer than ever, reluctant to give way to winter. The wind was subdued, leaves fell secretly and softly. Even the sun slipped through the branches as if unwilling to disrupt the delicate balance of beginnings. The world slowed, cautious not to disturb the fragile marvel of first connections. Their days fell into gentle rhythm. They sat beside the faded lotus pond, where water had long since receded, their reflections mingling with the golden haze of afternoon light. Practice exams became shared burdens, their laughter lightening the weight of expectations. Foggy mornings were made bearable by the promise of seeing one another, the uncertainty of the future softened by quiet companionship. Dreams filled the spaces between them. Lynn wished to study pedagogy, to stand in front of a classroom one day, sharing her love for words and their power. Khan hoped to move to Hanoi, to walk the city streets, chasing news stories and crafting sentences that would someday touch hearts far beyond his own. They made small promises, speaking them aloud in tentative voices. "If we pass the exams, we'll go together. We'll write letters if we're apart." In those moments, everything seemed possible. The world, with all its unknowns, felt within reach. But even the most golden season must turn. Unforeseen currents, life, family decisions, changing circumstances, crept in quietly, scattering their plans like leaves in a strong wind. There was no dramatic ending, no final goodbye beneath the trees. Rather, the days simply continued, each one unspooling further from the last. And by the time the chill of winter arrived, they were already walking different paths. Years later, all that remained of that time condensed into a pocket of memory, tiny, radiant, preserved with all its familiar details. The maple tree sheltering them from sunlight, the hand-knit scarf wound snug around her neck, the echo of his gentle laughter as they disappeared down a country road. One autumn, shared and savored. Just one season, perhaps, but it was enough. Enough to bloom quietly in the heart, recurring with every breath of wind and every falling leaf, forever unchanged and unforgotten. The year Lynn took the university entrance exam seemed to arrive without warning, and even more swiftly, it vanished, leaving barely a trace. All around her, the routine of daily life in the small village played on. Morning vendors calling from the muddy street, mothers ushering children to school, and the heavy air of a July morning thick with the scent of wet earth and the lingering sweetness of last night's rain. Lynn awoke early, slipping quietly from her bed, careful not to disturb her father. After folding her blanket, she donned her pressed white audai, the crisp linen both a comfort and a shield against the world outside. She tied her hair carefully, quickly, then clasped her schoolbooks to her chest, their worn edges and scrawled margins soft at her fingertips. There was an unspoken agreement with Khan, one formed in the gentlest moments over shared notebooks and whispered hopes. They would meet before sunrise in front of the school gate and ride their bicycles together to the exam site. It was a small promise, yet for Lynn, it contained the entire weight of her expectation for the future. By the time she arrived, a scattered crowd was already gathering. Voices urgent, some hopeful, others starched with anxiety. She leaned against the old, weathered wall beside the gate, watching the patchwork of uniforms bloom in the soft light. Lynn looked at her phone. A blank screen. No messages. The minute hand inched forward, each beat accompanied by the swell and fall of strangers' footsteps. She waited. At first, hope burned clear and bright inside her. Surely he would appear at any moment, calling her name shyly as always, adjusting the strap of his backpack. But as 7 o'clock passed and the crowd thinned, hope became a thin thread pulled almost to breaking. The world around her shifted. Classmates exchanged hurried goodbyes with their parents, steeled themselves, and disappeared into the building. Khan did not come. By the final call, Lynn drew a slow breath and walked the length of the gate into the school herself. No one looked twice at the girl in the white ao-dai, her face a careful mask. Inside, the exam room was cold, the fluorescent lights casting slow-moving shadows over neat rows of desks. She sat down and began, each stroke of her pen deliberate, detached. She wrote her essays and calculated figures, but her thoughts were nowhere near the paper. In the days that followed, Lynn searched for Khan everywhere her courage would allow. She circled the path to his house at the edge of the village, always at dusk, when shadows stretched long and memories twisted quietly in the silence. The house stood empty. Once there had been laughter, the smell of simmering broth, glimpses of Khan's mother in the garden, shuffling a broom across the threshold. Now weeds snaked through the courtyard, wild grass overtaking the steps, and the lock on the front door was rusty and tight. The maple tree that once shaded the yard shed its leaves in red handfuls, obscuring the path where they had once walked together. Rumors traveled quickly. Whispers of debts, of illness, of the family forced to vanish under cover of darkness. Some neighbors, more curious or less kind, said Khan's mother was gravely sick, that medical bills buried the family in quiet shame. Others insisted the debts were so large that there was nothing left to do but flee. None of the stories felt real to Lynn. They were like folded scraps of paper caught in the draft, their meanings scattered and indistinct. The uncertainty was worse than any concrete loss, a ghost that stalked her on lonely afternoons. Throughout all of it, Lynn remained composed. Her father saw her move wordlessly through the house, the admission letter to university waiting unread on the table. He asked nothing, but watched her with the careful patience that only comes from his own quiet grief. Lynn spent evenings in her small room, eyes fixed on the orchid pot her mother had left by the window. The orchid bloomed periodically, bursts of lilac against the green. She watched each petal unfurl, hoping it might bring with it some message, a letter, even a sign that Khan still existed somewhere beyond the village horizon. Nothing came, no explanation, apology, or farewell. The wound settled into her life, deep and invisible, a loss with no name. Summer surrendered to autumn. Lynn folded the university notice and placed it in her drawer, the gesture final and silent. She and her father shared few words, but he understood that some forms of heartbreak require only time. Loss, he knew, was not a storm that passed quickly. It lingered, reshaping the landscape quietly. Days became routine. Lynn left for the city, walking with measured steps down strange streets. University life was a blur. Crowded lecture halls, the jostle of city buses, the necessary solitude that came with a dormitory bed. She worked part-time jobs, taking shifts at a small cafe, tutoring younger students, sending what little she could home. Amid the blaring city lights and the ceaseless clamor, she filled her schedule so completely that her mind rarely wandered. But habits have tender roots. Every autumn, as the air cooled and golden light crept through the city's alleys, Lynn remembered home more sharply. The flash of maple leaves vivid against the gray, the feel of wool against her skin, and the echo of a gaze, gentle, steady, gone, returned each year. There were days she walked to the central train station, standing quietly as the trains hissed and rolled on their way. She would watch the platform empty and fill, each departure heavy with unseen farewells. Even as she collected new routines, new friends, new grades, future plans, the ache remained. The sadness was less bitter now, less raw, but still there. Some nights, she sat by her narrow window and looked out at the city lights, remembering that morning at the school gate. Dew slick on the iron roof, the sound of distant voices, the simple hope that someone dear would come and stand beside her. In time, Lynn learned there were losses one must wear quietly, sorrows that belonged to a single heart. She did not blame Khan nor herself. The world was full of departures, of ends that came without permission. Trains would leave stations, families would vanish, and sometimes the most profound goodbyes were the ones never spoken out loud. Yet with each passing year, she also learned that life could carry on. The pain did not disappear, but it receded, growing gentler at its edges. In the silence of her solitude, Lynn discovered a resilience she had not known before, shaped by the memory of what she had lost and the quiet hope that, in some way, she could continue forward, carrying all of this within her, like a song that needed no words. This year, autumn drifted into the valley earlier than usual, arriving on a hush of cool winds that swept through the fields and forests, rousing the first scattering of leaves from their summer branches. The air had acquired that gentle chill, the kind that lingers just long enough to carry the crispness of turning seasons and wrap even the busiest heart in a sense of yearning. Lynn's footsteps felt light and uncertain as she made her way down the familiar lane, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of an old coat, her breath merging with the thin, smoky mist that hovered over the town at dusk. 7 years had passed since she'd last seen this place, her childhood home tucked between the hills and the gentle, persistent song of the wind. She paused at the edge of the yard where the house sat, a little worn from the years perhaps, but as steadfast and patient as the tide. Lynn let her hand fall upon the old wooden door, its paint faded and the grain rough beneath her fingers. Just inside, she heard the sounds of her father preparing dinner, every clatter and sizzle echoing memories she thought she'd locked away for good. In the backyard, grass had taken over where rows of vegetables once grew, wild and lush in the absence of her mother's careful touch. The faint, earthy scent was different, a little less ordered, a little more wild. Still, it was her home, and she felt the anxiety of city living begin to dissolve, replaced by something warmer and quieter. Her father shuffled slowly through the kitchen, weaker than she remembered, but determined in the small routines that spoke of love. Cabbage soup simmering, fish braised with ginger, eggs fried golden and light. Lynn sat at the table, every bite steeped in a comfort that soothed old aches and let her heart settle, if only for a little while. As the afternoon waned, curiosity and longing led her beyond the fence, along the dirt roads and narrow paths she once knew by heart. The town's edges blurred into fields and forgotten corners, each turn a gentle reminder of days when autumn was marked by laughter and dreams beneath spreading maple trees. When she reached the old schoolyard, the changes startled her. A fresh coat of paint on the gate, a new sign with an unfamiliar name. Yet the corner where the maple trees stood remained untouched by time, their branches reaching upwards in gold and scarlet brilliance, a canopy against the sky. Lynn lingered at the edge of the yard, her heart thumping with the memory of years gone by. She moved closer, drawn to the last maple tree, where sunlight fell in wavering bands through a lattice of leaves. Time seemed to fold back on itself, layer upon layer of memory pressed between the pages of her mind. She halted suddenly, struck by the sight of someone already beneath the tree. There, as if conjured from some distant chapter, sat a man. His frame was thin, his back slightly bowed. Silver threads glimmered through his hair, and his shirt bore the careless creases of travel. In his hands he cradled a battered notebook and a black ink pen, lost in a moment of quiet reflection. The way the fading light touched his shoulders, the way he seemed anchored to that spot. It all felt achingly familiar. Lynn stood very still. She listened to the shallow breaths caught in her chest, to the faint sound of the wind winding its way through the maple leaves. When the man raised his head, both recognition and surprise passed through the lines of his face. Despite the years, despite all that life had added or taken away, she knew him instantly. He said her name with a mixture of wonder and longing, his voice rich and rough, carrying an old, half-remembered melody. Lynn managed the smallest nod, each of them caught between the urge to move and the need to linger in the safety of stillness. Time hovered, strangely weightless, as if the autumn air itself had pressed pause on the world outside their memory. Kun stood slowly, carefully pocketing his notebook. He watched her with the wary hope of someone who had rehearsed this reunion 1,000 times, but still didn't know what to do with it, not really. He confessed he never thought she'd return, not after all these years, not after everything unsaid had hardened into silence. Her gaze drifted up to the gentle shifting of the leaves. She admitted she never expected to be back either, that the world she remembered was shaded now by change. The landscape of childhood altered in ways both subtle and grand. Their words fell softly, each one held carefully, like fragile things afraid to break the hush. Kin's apology broke the silence, carrying a weight heavier than the wind. He spoke of loss, the abrupt death of his mother, the sudden departure of his father, the forced move to another province, and all the things he'd wanted to share but couldn't carry with him. Every syllable was etched by regret, his voice trembling at the edges. For a long time, Lynn listened, her hands deep in her coat, fingers brushing the fraying edge of an old scarf. She told him quietly that she had been angry, and that she had been hurt, but most of all, she had loved him. Love, she reflected, means losing a bit of oneself each time someone disappears from your life. The ache does not fade, not really. It only teases itself into new shapes. Kun blinked back the thread of tears. He admitted his fear, that returning would mean facing old pain, that seeing Lynn again might unravel all the fragile threads that had kept him moving forward. And yet, he confessed, her presence was a comfort even as it reopened old wounds. Together they stood in that hush, the rustling of leaves above like a chorus of wordless memories. Lynn drew closer and brought forth the scarf, faded and woolen, woven with the trembling hands of a teenage girl. He remembered every stitch, each one a confession of tenderness during awkward, hopeful days. She pressed it into his hands, insisting quietly he should keep it. She had worn it for long enough, carried the memory far enough. Their fingers brushed for a moment. Khan's hands trembled. Neither spoke further. There were no neat resolutions, no grand gestures. Only the slow passage of golden light, the quiet companionship of two people learning, perhaps, that forgiveness is its own kind of returning. They walked together beneath the maples, side by side, feeling the leaves brushing against their hair and catching in their clothes. No words, no promises. Only the knowledge that sometimes simply sharing the silence is enough to begin again. Autumn in the city felt different than in the countryside. Here the sky was muffled by the silvery haze of morning buses, and the air was tinged not with the scent of dried grasses, but with a restless symphony of engines and hurried footsteps. Lynn stepped off the bus and pulled her small suitcase close. Her fingers did not tremble, though in her backpack, the sealed envelope seemed to carry more weight than anything else she possessed. For days she had pondered the right words, uncertain if any language could name the softness and ache of first love. And yet she had written, her pen tracing memories like wandering beams of moonlight on old wooden floors. The pale yellow paper, crisp, almost translucent, held her quiet midnight confessions. As Lynn navigated the crowded pavements, her heart moved at its own pace, sometimes racing with anticipation, sometimes slowing in a gentle ache as the maple leaves overhead flickered gold against the endless blue. Cities held their own autumns, she thought. Here and there, a splash of crimson, a drift of ambered leaves in the corner of a playground, the delicate hush of wind tangled in the sweater of a stranger. But nothing quite matched the autumn she had left behind. For years, Lynn had measured her life by the rhythm of seasons. She remembered the way morning mists clung to the fields, the laughter of cicadas dissolving into evening hush, the way sadness seemed to press closer as the days shortened and the maple canopies burned themselves out in a brief exhalation of color. Each swath of longing, each note in the chords of time, wove quietly through her days. She had once cherished the myth that time would erase everything, that given enough autumns and enough silent dawns, she would forget. But after seeing Khan again under the maples, she realized the truth. Some things were never meant to be forgotten. Some memories needed to be carried, not as burdens, but as part of the shape of one's heart. Lynn remembered the scarf, soft and faded, tucked in the side pocket of her travel bag. It was a relic of another year, when her laughter was easier and love was clumsy and immediate. She had kept it, not out of yearning for Khan, but for the girl she had been, earnest and unguarded, willing to leap wholeheartedly into the unknown, even if the landing was nothing but sorrow. During her nights in her mother's home, the past pressed close around her, kind but insistent. The room was filled with remembrances, the peeling table, the faded cushion, the faint fragrance of orchids drifting from the windowsill as her pen flowed across the page. Each word was a release, a tiny untangling of the knots she'd carried for 7 long, silent years. She had not written to demand anything from the past, nor to recover what was lost. The letter was a gentle offering, an acknowledgement of what had been beautiful, what had hurt, and what no longer defined her. It was gratitude for the first heartbreak, for the innocence that ushered her into adulthood. It was hope for peace, for both of them. The morning she mailed the letter, mist still hung low on the hills. The post office was small and quiet, its windows steamed with the breath of the new day. The clerk took her envelope without comment, fingers brushing once, lightly, against the sealed paper. It would travel to an address that was no longer there, a place whose threshold she could no longer cross. But Lynn believed, in some quiet corner of her heart, that memories could travel too. Perhaps the letter would arrive where it was most needed, not in Khan's hands, but in the silent, golden intersections of their shared past. On the long ride back to the city, Lynn sat by the window and let her thoughts unravel. Outside, the road wound between endless rows of maple trees. The leaves, in their final blaze of scarlet and gold, drifted gently to the earth, drawing soft patterns across the asphalt. She watched as each one fluttered downward, a quiet farewell, a word unsaid, a promise released. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The ache remained, but lighter now, a memory honored, a sadness tenderly put to rest. She wondered if Khan, wherever he was, also paused beneath autumn trees to remember the time they had spent together. Perhaps, in his own way, he too carried nothing but gratitude. As the bus entered the city, the trees grew sparser, giving way to the silhouettes of tall buildings and the swirl of pedestrians. Somewhere in this great living city, Lynn knew she could begin again. Not because she had forgotten, but because she had finally understood the true nature of letting go. The last autumn had come and gone. No longer bright with innocence, no longer weighed down by regret. It was simply part of her story, a chapter complete and lovingly set aside. She imagined the scarf, folded carefully in her drawer, no longer needed for comfort or remembering. It was simply what it had always been, a piece of another time, draped in the warmth of past affection and the calm of acceptance. From her window that evening, Lynn watched the city light up with the glow of 100,000 lives. High above, the moon hung pale and impartial, just as it had in the countryside. The scent of autumn was fainter here, blending with the energy of the city, but still, Lynn could sense its quiet farewell. In her heart, she whispered a blessing for herself and for Khan, for the years they had wandered apart and for all the seasons yet to come. She trusted now that love was not something one could hold or release on demand. It moved through a life like the wind through autumn branches, shaping memories, tenderly rearranging the soul. This autumn, she would put away the scarf. She would walk forward lightly, no longer searching for lost addresses or unreturned words. Every ending, she knew, was a beginning dressed in gentle disguise. And so, Lynn stepped into the new season, heart open and light, carrying only what was hers, letting the rest fall quietly away, like the last maple leaf of the year settling peacefully to earth.